Welcome back. Today we will be continuing the schools of psychology. In previous video, we got to know about structuralism, functionalism, and psychoanalysis. Today we will get to know about behaviorism. In contrast to psychoanalysis, behaviorism, led by figures like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, focused entirely on observable behavior. Behaviorists believe that all behavior is learned from the environment, dismissing the need to study mental processes. Ivan Pavlov originally studied theology, which he later abandoned to study physiology and chemistry. He then became a skilled surgeon. While working in an academy, he turned his attention towards correlation between salvation and digestion. He conducted experiments to show relationship between autonomic functions and the nervous system. This research led to the development of Pavlov's most important concept, the conditioned reflex. Then Pavlov had begun using his research on conditioned reflexes to explain human psychoses. Classical conditioning was Pavlov's most famous and influential work, and it laid much of groundwork for behavioral psychology. In essence, the idea of classical conditioning is simply learning something by association. Pavlov gave four basic principles: the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, the conditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response. The unconditioned stimulus is any act that creates a response, that is, when stimulus automatically trigger response. For example, if pollen makes you sneeze, the pollen is an unconditioned stimulus. The response that is automatically triggered is called unconditioned response. For example, the sneeze was unconditioned response. Conditioned stimulus is when a neutral stimulus becomes associated with an unconditioned stimulus, thus triggering a conditioned response. The conditioned response is the one that was learned from the once neutral stimulus. Confused? Don't be. It's actually very simple. Imagine if you flinched after hearing a loud sound. The sound triggered a natural response, making it an unconditioned stimulus, and the flinching was unconditioned response because it was something you did unconsciously as a result of unconditioned stimulusum. Now, if you repeatedly witnessed a certain movement happen at the same time as, or a little bit before the loud sound occurred, for example, a swinging their fist to slam it on the table, you might then begin to associate that movement with the loud sound, flinching whenever you see a fist move in a similar manner, even if there is no sound. The movement of the fist will be the conditioned stimulus that became associated with the unconditioned stimulus, that is the sound, and made you flinch, which will be the conditioned response. Now let's move on to Pavlov's dogs. He initially started studying digestion. Eventually, he began to notice that the dogs would begin salivating every time an assistant entered room. Pavlov hypothesized that production of saliva was actually in response to a certain stimulus. To dig deeper into his findings, Pavlov set out to create one of the most famous scientific experiment, Pavlov's dogs. The test subjects were laboratory dogs. First, an unconditioned stimulus was chosen, which is food that will evoke a natural and automatic response, that is salivation. The neutral stimulus was sound of bell. First dog was exposed to food at which saliva was generated. Then they were exposed to bell, which generated no response or salivation. Then the experiment began. The subjects were exposed to neutral stimulus, that is bell, and immediately after that the food was presented. Over a period of time, the subjects equated the sound of bell to the delivery of food. And then they started to salivate on neutral stimulus, that is on hearing the sound of the bell. Next, we have John B. Watson. Inspired by the work of Pavlov, Watson began to study physiology, biology, animal behavior, and behavior of children. Watson believed that children operated on the same principle that animals did, though they were more complicated beings. Watson took a great interest in Pavlov's experiment on dogs and conditioning, and wanted to see if he could take behavioral conditioning one step further by classically conditioning emotional reactions in people. The participant of the experiment was a nearly 9 months old baby Watson referred to as Albert B, but who is now referred to commonly as Little Albert. Watson and his research assistant Rayner exposed the baby to a variety of stimuli and recorded the baby's reactions. The stimuli included a rabbit, a monkey, white rat, burning newspaper, and masks. At first, the child showed no fear of any of the stimuli. The next time Watson exposed the child to white rat, he simultaneously used a hammer and hit a metal pipe, which created an extremely loud noise. The baby began to cry from the noise. Watson repeated the pairing of loud noise with white rat. Eventually, the baby began to cry just by seeing the white rat, without any noise being paired with it. The neutral stimulus was white rat. The unconditioned stimulus was the loud noise created by hammer hitting the metal pipe. The unconditioned response was fear. The conditioned stimulus was the white rat and the conditioned response was fear. Though it was a landmark experiment in psychology. This experiment has been criticized for several reasons. The baby reactions were not measured objectively and were subjective interpretation of Watson and Rayner, and it has many ethical questions. In today's world, this would be considered unethical. That's all for today's video. Kindly like and subscribe for more.